Well, hello and welcome to another edition of PORA. I'm your host, David Russell, and I do not have a co-host today. Well, at least not yet. Maybe one will come by later. But I got my guests, and sometimes that's just all you need, right? Well, I got two new guests on today, and it's going to be an interesting show. I got Sahih Luke and Nazam Guffoor from
Hi.
Dawah. And I'm going to go to you first, Luke, because you're the one that contacted me for this, and let you kind of introduce yourself, your ministry, and what's going on today, and what you're a part of, and so forth.
Well, thank you for that, David. I'll keep it short and brief. My apologetics ministry is called East of the Jordan Apologetics, and Mr. Nazam, he's from Dawah, and they've been doing some interesting streams on the historicity of the New Testament for approximately about a year. And so I thought it'd be more productive to engage one-on-one. That way we have time to discuss more specific points in detail, elaborate, so on and so forth. And so I reached out to you because the book of Jude was the last book that was discussed on their stream. And I thought it would be a good idea to elaborate on some points with Nazam.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, what got you into apologetics and so on?
I would say the run-ins with the Jehovah's Witnesses. Yeah.
Yeah, we all deal with those.
First time I encountered them, I was frustrated because I didn't know how to respond. I believe there was an answer. I just couldn't accept what they said. I felt that it didn't make sense because I came across that verse, in the past, and I know it didn't say that, and so that's what led me to dig deeper, and it went from Jehovah's Witnesses to other cults and then other religions.
Yeah. It's funny because you reached out, you were a fan, and I was like, yeah, sure. I'm the type of guy that hosts guests that listen to the show. So anybody that's out there, if you have a show that you would like to, put out here as well, I'm always open to those type of things. Matter of fact, we usually hold a guest host month every February and allow guests to host shows with us. So it's kind of fun. Yeah. So, well, next, last but not least, we got Nazam from Dawah. Nazam, why don't you tell us a little bit about that and what you guys do and so forth?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't come with the expectation to discuss the historicity of Jude, nor did I know I was discussing it with, say, Luke. There was nothing said about this in the email.
Oh,
yeah,
so
Nazam,
I feel like I've been ambushed.
Oh, no.
No, Nazam, we have the same emails. I did contact you. I even
No, I have the email on my screen. I can show it to you in front of you. There's nothing about discussing historicity of Jude, nor is there anything about discussing with, say, Luke. I thought I was gonna discuss with someone called EOTJ Apologetics.
That's right, Nazam.
So, where is this person?
You're talking to that person, Nazam.
Oh, okay. So, how comes you didn't identify yourself as, say, Luke?
I have in the past, and I thought you would know because
You were, say, Luke. You should have just said that you're, say, Luke. I don't have a problem with discussing, because in the past, when I've known you as, say, Luke, I have actually asked you if you'd be willing to just have a private conversation.
right. So I apologize. I apologize for the confusion. I have identified myself as that in the past, so I'm sorry if there is any confusion. Since you guys have discussed Jude in the past, I thought maybe we can
Sure,
discuss only the points that maybe you raised.
Yeah, it's just you didn't say anything about you wanted to discuss the historicity of Jude, because if I knew, I would have then rewatched the video, so I could have known what I said on the recording.
Right. So just for clarification, Nazam, I did mention that maybe I apologize if you didn't see that part, but how about we only
there's nothing in the email about discussing letter of Jude.
Well, I can put it in the back.
I'll show you the
I do
email.
have it. And again, I apologize. This is not an ambush. This is
and
not
there's nothing in the email about letter of Jude. But it's okay if you want to now discuss letter of Jude, then we can discuss letter of Jude.
Nazam, also, to make it fair for you, I'm not going to let you feel like you're ambushed, because that's not the type of show I run. But what did you want to discuss as well?
Well, it just said it was an informal discussion.
And that's what we'll do.
Okay.
So, yeah, what did you have in mind to discuss as well?
Well, I thought maybe the crucifixion will come up because EOTJ Apologetics a few months ago sent a video to me making their points about the crucifixion. So I thought maybe that may come up, or just
So,
really in general, like why you're a Muslim or why you're a Christian, or
so I
Yeah,
have no
exactly. No,
problem.
you know what? Yeah, and Luke, I think that's fair. I think that if we
but if you
devote,
want to discuss the history, if you have something prepared to discuss the history
yeah,
of Jude, then we
yeah,
can
Yeah.
do
So,
that now.
so
So
yeah, and I think that's good because if it, just to be fair, we can discuss both in this hour that we have with each other, and we can
okay,
discuss both to make it fair, since things weren't hashed out fully in the email, and
okay.
no one's you're not
Do,
really prepared. I'm not about to like throw somebody that's unprepared in
how
any
about
type
this?
of discussion,
How
and
about
I'll
this?
moderate, and I'm pretty much out of it. It's your guys' conversation, so that's what
Excuse
we
me,
do
David.
here at
Okay.
PORA. Go
Let
ahead.
me let me
okay,
let me put this forth and then see how you guys decide. I have no problem speaking of the crucifixion. However, I wouldn't want the stream to be intermingled where some people come and they listen to part of Jude, part of the crucifixion. I'd rather
okay.
dedicate. I'd
Since
rather
it's been
dedicate it.
advertised,
Right,
okay,
and so I'd rather just dedicate. But I would also mention this, Nazam. This is not a setup, and I understand maybe you weren't unprepared because of miscommunication. So I apologize for
okay.
that. How about I bring up maybe just a handful of points that you've mentioned, and then if you can't recall
Sure.
exactly, I can remind
Okay.
you what you said, and then we can just conversate on those points if that's okay.
Yeah, I
Okay then.
also,
Cool.
yeah, Luke, but I also do think it's fair, that you guys, after you do that portion, since there's no real like huge preparation done, that we could also maybe transition to some of those other things of why you guys are, some things that Nazam would like to
Sure.
mention too. It's up to you guys,
Maybe
but
we can discuss it in the
yeah.
future then. Yep.
Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, yeah, it's either or. Whatever you guys feel fair about. I don't want anybody to feel unfair as well. But yeah, Nizam, I mean, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do at EF Dawah and stuff, so we can get to know you a little bit.
Sure. I
We're a
mean,
big
a
family
fish.
here, you know.
Yeah, I can see. Yeah. Officially, I'm not really formally affiliated with EF Dawah, but I'm invited onto the platform as a guest, and I've been doing this historicity stream with them for like just over a year and a half, and we started out originally discussing the historicity of the four gospels, and then we moved on to the Pauline corpus, and we're actually just now coming towards the end, in which we'll be covering the Book of Revelations, possibly this Sunday. So I'll be doing that for about, as I said, just over a year and a half, and I've learned so much from it, just my own personal like education, from it, and yeah, over the time, I met Say Luke, but I think I was already familiar with Say Luke,
Right.
from some of the other online discussions or debates taking place on YouTube and on Twitter as well. But yeah, I've been interested in comparative religions for a very long time, and I got started really about the time when a Christian friend of mine, he's started to attend the church, and I was going to the mosque, and we would get involved in like religious debates, and from there that kind of sparked my interest, and I began to study Christianity more, and why I believed in Islam. And from there, I just became very interested in Islam and Christianity and in the Muslim Christian online community.
Awesome. Well, that's really cool, man. So what we're gonna do, like you said, have just an informal dialogue, and I'll like push it in certain directions if I think that we've beaten the dead horse long enough, or
Right.
whatever,
Right.
But this is your guys' conversation, and I leave it up to you guys to, discuss what you want to discuss. I
Sure.
know Luke does affirm the historicity of the book that he wanted to
Yes.
talk about. So I'll let him take it away on that, and then like if you guys have any issues with that and how you want to run it, that you guys can work that out. And like I said, I'm all for a fair conversation. If I think there's anything nefarious, I'll jump in as well. So,
Uh,
but
so
I'm pretty sure everything's cool.
right. Thank you, David. I appreciate that, and thank you again, Nazam. And again, I apologize for any miscommunication. Um, one of the things I thought maybe would be a good point to start off with so far would be the mention of Jude not being able to write in Greek. You mentioned in the first stream that given what we know about first century Palestine, the background, certain people being peasants, that it's unlikely that a person such as Jude or maybe a fisherman or any of Jesus's disciples would have been capable of writing in Greek. Do you recall?
Yes, now it's slowly coming back to me. Yep.
Okay, right on. So if you recall, your position was it's not likely that it's not likely that this would be the case in regard to Jude. And so, in response to that, I would ask for you if you would just kindly consider two things. David, Wayne Grudem mentioned that Hellenization from Alexander the Great had already taken place and progressed through Judea for 4 centuries already at this point, and that many people in Galilee spoke and wrote in Greek. And that Grudem also notes that hundreds of Jewish ossuaries have been uncovered there, demonstrating that they were bilingual and they understood Greek. Moreover, a second point is that the Gospels tell us that at the time of Jesus' crucifixion, there was an inscription placed on the cross written in 3 languages, and one of those languages was in Greek, which presupposes that at least some people could read and write in Greek. So, in consideration of these 2 points to this information, wouldn't it have been at least possible for Jude to develop his ability to read and write in Greek, given what we know, and given the fact that he's writing 30 to 50 years later, which would mean he would have had 30 to 50 years to at least develop his literacy in the Greek language?
Well, I mean, first of all, we need to identify which Jude we're speaking about, since Jude or Judas was a common name back then. And since the author himself identifies as the brother of James, generally it's been taken for granted that this is the brother of Jesus. But something odd is noted is that why would he claim to be the brother of James and not mention that Jesus was his brother, since Jesus was more significant among the two? And also, further, just because the Gospels say that the sign also included Greek, doesn't necessarily mean that this was the case, because we know that the Gospels were written in Greek, and it's possible that this could be an example of something being unhistorical information contained within the Gospels, that the Gospels are anachronistically reading something back into the life of Jesus, where people's first language would have been Aramaic back then. And third, from apocryphal sources from the 2nd century, we know of Jude, the brother of James and Jesus. His social status didn't change, but he still remained in this kind of impoverished background. And so from that, it seems unlikely that Jude, the brother of Jesus and James, would have learnt Greek.
Okay, so in response to that, I would point out that we moved from Greek to which Jude and then which James. So I would get back to
Mhm.
that. So right now I want to focus back on the Greek, and again, it doesn't matter if it's authentic, if it's really Jude, or if it's an imitator claiming to be Jude. The point is that this epistle is written in Greek, and so back to my initial question, we will get to which Jude and which James, and we can just conversate about why I think it is the brother of Jesus and why I think James is also the brother of Jesus. But the first point, I'm going to repeat my question in light of the 2 points of Alexander establishing Greek in this area. And just to also address another point, you mentioned that maybe there was some foul play in part of the Gospels, right? So problem with that is that we have archaeological facts that tell us, we have pottery, we have ossuaries, so it's not just whether the Gospels may have been corrupted and we can't trust what it says just because it says that there is a title is put on the cross and one of the languages written in Greek, that we can therefore dismiss it. Rather, Brent Nungbreed says we have to treat the Gospels and the New Testament writings as ancient artifacts. But more importantly, Nazam, is that it's not just written sources that say this. Again, we have archaeological artifacts, we have pottery, we have title lists, and we have ossuaries. So, in light of this, we do know that Greek was a language spoken during that time, and it's also important to keep in mind that this was the language of trade. So a lot of people would have spoken it. So in light of the fact that Alexander the Great, Hellenized this area, in the light of the fact that we have ossuaries, and in light of the fact that we have title lists, in light of the fact that we have pottery with Greek inscriptions on them, do you think that it was possible for Jude to at least develop his literacy in Greek given 30 to 50 years?
Yeah, just because like the purpose of the crucifixion was also to serve as a deterrent to frighten people away from, because the charge was that Jesus was claiming to be the king of the Jew, which was a treason, a state treason. And so the purpose was to deter other people from doing the same thing. So and since
But if it's written in Greek, doesn't that presuppose at least some people can read the sign, and which therefore they can read and write in Greek? At least some people.
Um, only for the benefit of diaspora Jews, those Jews that were living outside of Palestine. But if this was something that was done in Jerusalem, then Jerusalem, the native language would have been Aramaic. So it's possible that this could be another example of something being unhistorical, especially since the Gospels were not written in Jerusalem, but were written outside of Jerusalem. And it's possible that they could have somehow assumed some Greek custom cultures and read that back into Palestinian Jewish lifestyle. With regards to Judas, or the brother of Jesus, is it possible that he could have taught himself or learned Greek from somewhere? Yes, it is possible, but just because something's possible doesn't mean it's likely or probable.
Right. So do you grant that it was at least a possibility that
Yes, of
Jude
course.
could have? Okay. Okay. Now I want to address one more point, and then we can get into Jude and James. But this has to do more specifically to the allegation that, as the status of a peasant, a lower class status, that the chances of Jude being literate in Greek is even more not reasonable. Now, I'm going to quote from you what Michael Kruger and Andreas Kostenberger say on page 184. If you haven't checked out the book, it's an awesome book. It's a rebuttal to Bart Ehrman's claims and the Bauer Ehrman thesis. And so on page
What's the book called?
it's called The Heresy of Orthodoxy,
Okay.
and it's by Michael Kruger and Andreas Kostenberger. And so he's responding to the Bauer Ehrman thesis and the allegation specifically that Bauer Ehrman says it's unlikely that peasants and Jesus's disciples would have been able to read and write in Greek. Now, he gives a list, and it covers a range of about 4 or 5 pages, but I'm just going to read for you just a small portion of it. So it says, quote, thus Ehrman's claims that the earliest followers of Jesus were quote unquote simple peasants stands in direct contrast to the consensus of modern scholarship. What is more, beyond this fact, one can assume that literacy was always directly correlated with social status, as Ehrman has erroneously done. Indeed, most notably, ancient scribes themselves were most often found among slaves and who had no physical possessions at all, or among the lower or middle who had, or among the lower or middle class. Members of the wealthy upper class would often not read or write themselves, even though they may have had the ability, but would employ lower class slaves or scribes to do it for them. Page 185. Given the fact that Peter and John grew up as Jews, we would expect that they would have had some basic education, as would have been common for Jewish boys. Even Jesus was considered uneducated, John 7:15, but yet was able to step into the synagogue and read from the scroll, apparently with a substantial degree of proficiency. Luke 4:17 through 20, unquote. So basically, Kostenberger and Kruger do note that Jewish boys would have had at least some basic level of education. he notes
Sure.
that the majority of the scribes who are obviously literate came from the lower class and were even peasants. And I think one of the most strongest arguments is that he notes, given the New Testament treated as historical artifacts, um, they depict Jesus reading from a scroll. And if Jude is the brother of Jesus, then the likelihood of Jude being literate or receiving that type of education to read would have likely, been the same. What is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, what I would say to that is when it comes to the Epistle of Jude, it's not just a simple case of being able to spell or write few words in Greek, or being to have a mini conversation in Greek in order to get by. But the author of Greek seems to be highly skilled and trained in Greek literacy, and also he shows a very extensive knowledge of other Jewish apocryphal works. So he seems to be aware of, for example, the book of Enoch. He also seems to be aware of the assumptions of Moses, when the devil and the angel fight over the body of
Right.
Moses. And also he seems to be aware of another so-called apocryphal Jewish work. The name escapes me now. So this shows that this person, whoever wrote it, is familiar and has read these other works and may have read more. So this shows like more than just your average Jewish peasant person, but it
But
comes
again,
across as being a scholar of that particular time.
well, again, Nazim, I don't want to sound redundant and I don't want to go in circles, but just because a person may have been a peasant doesn't mandate, it's a non sequitur to assume or think it mandates that he would have been unable to have reached this level of sufficiency in Greek, especially given 30 to 50 years time.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm saying it's possible, but it just
Okay.
seems improbable.
Okay. So I'm going to quote for you what a few scholars say, and then we can move on to Jude or James or the apocryphal material if you like. But D.A. Carson wrote, quote, Rabbi Akiva was apparently unlettered until the age of 40 and then became one of the greatest rabbis of his generation. It would not be surprising if some of the leaders of the church, decades after its founding, had devoted themselves to some serious study, unquote. Likewise, J. Warner Wallace argues that given the benefit of time and reflection, it's reasonable that the New Testament writers developed the theological sophistication necessary to write or dictate their gospels or epistles, unquote. So you want to go over the chances are that it was Jude the brother, or the likelihood that it wasn't Jude the brother of Jesus?
Yeah, so I would say it's not necessarily that the New Testament is written by the original early followers of Jesus who came from like a impoverished background, but these could have been written by people of like more upper social class who converted to Christianity, and they wrote the documents, and also some of the writings are attributed to certain people, whom many New
Are you
Testament
saying
scholars
Jude?
don't think.
Are you saying Jude is sometimes attributed to? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Jude is attributed sometimes to someone else, or can you repeat that, please?
Well, most New Testament scholars don't believe that Jude, the brother of James and Jesus, wrote the letter of Jude. But whether this author is what the technical term that biblical scholars use is pseudepigraphal, which is like fake writings or someone pretending to be someone that they're not. Whether the author himself is deliberately doing that, I wouldn't necessarily say that, because strictly speaking, the author is not claiming to be, that brother of James and Jesus. It could be some other James that was famous at the time, but is like no longer known or famous to us today.
All right.
But
So how
at the
about
very least, it's an anonymous writing in my view.
all right? So I'm gonna challenge that part right now, but first I think we can just cover James. I've asked this question to someone on your team before, but right now you're saying that you've committed an argument from silence. You're saying, well, it could have possibly been attributed to a James that was maybe well known back then, but we don't have the writings right now. That is an argument from silence, but I would ask you, could you name personally a more prominent, eminent James than James, the brother of Jesus, who was the bishop of the Church of Jerusalem?
Yes, I would say that you're also arguing from silence as well, that you're assuming that because there isn't no other famous, well-known James, therefore it must be that James, the brother of Jesus.
Well, I'm
Whereas,
not, because I'm not arguing from silence, because historians and scholars of early Christianity have considered all the evidence, all the available data from ancient Christianity, right? And they've noticed that there is no other candidate, there is no other James. And just so you don't
so
take my opinion from it, I I'll let you speak right now. I'm sorry, I don't want to take up more
no,
time,
no.
but
What?
let me quote for you real quick
Okay.
what Bauckham says on page 6 of his commentary. He says, quote, the second phrase, which distinguishes this Judas from others of the same name, does so by mentioning his relationship to the only man in the primitive church who could be called simply, quote unquote, James, with no risk of ambiguity, unquote. So many scholars, right? I can't name more than three right now that would say no, it wasn't this James. And so because they looked at all the evidence and they said we have no evidence from antiquity that says there was a more prominent James. Therefore, the best conclusion and the most likelihood we have to believe what it says, that it was James, the brother of Jesus, as Clement of Alexandria, as other early Christians tell us.
Well, if you read, do you have access to Raymond Brown's introduction to the New Testament? Have you heard of this scholar, Raymond Brown?
Oh yeah, and I've got the works Death of the Messiah. So I've
Okay,
heard of Raymond
cool.
Brown, of
Yeah, it's a
course.
very good book. Yeah. So here's another like a famous book, which is probably after his commentary to John's Gospel is probably his most famous work, is which is basically his introduction to the New Testament.
Right.
And in the new in that particular book, he goes by each of the books, and he gives the scholarly discussion, and also what is the percentage or the consensus among scholars as regards to the authorship. So when it comes to the letter of Jude, I believe the majority of New Testament scholars would regard it as being anonymous author. So it is by a Jude, but we just don't know which particular Jude, even though traditionally it was linked to the brother of Jesus and James.
Right. Okay. So thank
We
you.
can
Right.
agree
So
to disagree.
traditionally, so real quick. So I'm gonna go to Jude now, and I'm gonna give my opinion. But so you recognize traditionally it is
Yeah,
linked the James, who's the brother of Jesus, and then
and
as I
James.
mentioned
Yeah.
right now, um, so just to be real brief, right now you can't think of or recall, or you haven't heard of another James other than this James who's more prominent so far. Is that the case,
Um.
or do you know of one that's more prominent?
No.
Okay. So so I maintain what Clement of Alexandria says, what the other writers say, that it's the son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. This James is the brother of Jesus, and therefore also the brother of Jude, which is why Jude calls him himself, the brother of James. Now, in regard to pseudepigrapha, I don't think the scholars who maintain it's pseudepigrapha do so for the reasons you probably think. But how about we
Yeah,
let me
I'm
ask,
not aware of any scholars that regard it as pseudepigraphal. Are you?
yeah, I can name a few. I think JB Myers,
Oh, okay.
a few others, right?
I
They
just
do.
assume it was regarded as anonymous.
Yeah, well, some consider it pseudepigraphal, but they do so because they claim that
Interesting.
there's internal evidence that may suggest, it's theoretical, it may suggest that Jude is writing late, and therefore it can't be written from the actual brother of Jesus, and therefore that's what they base their conclusion on, right? But they don't base it on any external evidence. So um, so we can get to the other points. You can just tell me yes or no, and just let me know your
Okay.
thoughts right here. In regard to pseudepigraphy, um, was pseudepigraphy ever the reason that you are aware of why the letter was disputed or rejected by the early Christians?
Not as far as I can recall.
Okay, so I would tell you that Eusebius did rank it among the disputed books, but he did so because of its paucity. He tells us not many of the ancients quoted from it, so that was the reason.
To be honest, you're actually reminding me now. I think it was due to because it's cited from apocryphal works, which is why, some of the early church were reluctant to accept it into the canon. Some said that it could be used as something of beneficial, but they wouldn't regard it as scripture or being canonical, whereas others just completely rejected it because it contained these so-called apocryphal Jewish writings.
Right. So okay. So the question is, why was it disputed or rejected? The follow up is that because it was pseudepigraphal? And so Eusebius ranked it as a disputed book, but not a rejected book, and he did so because of its paucity, right? Now
So
Jerome
are you
and
saying Eusebius himself never rejected it, but others did, or others doubted its authorship?
Eusebius, no, because there's a difference between disputed and being spurious or rejected.
Okay.
Eusebius actually had two categories, and if
Just
you
so I'm clear, which Eusebius are you referring to?
the church historian who wrote the
Of
ecclesiastical history.
Caesarea
Yes,
from the 4th
right.
century. Okay.
So in book 3, chapter 25, he gives a reason why it was disputed, and he categorized it as a disputed. But I want to just keep in mind, I don't want to get too much off topic. He had two different
okay.
categories, and being a disputed book wasn't a bad thing. He was just letting you know that this book is disputed, but he also ends on a good note. He says it's still read publicly in many of the churches. Now I know you just mentioned right now that some thought you can benefit from it, so they may have read it for that reason. But going back to your other reason, another reason why it was disputed was because, as Jerome tells us in Lives of Illustrious Men, and Didymus also tells us, they tell us that it was disputed and rejected precisely because Jude included apocryphal material. So in light of that, I would tell you, according to what we know from the early Christians, according to Eusebius, according to Jerome and Didymus, the reason what the letter was disputed was precisely because of its paucity and because it quoted from apocryphal material. But take note that pseudepigrapha was never the issue why the letter of Jude was doubted. Would you agree with that?
I don't think I never said that.
Okay, but would you agree with that?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
To the best of my knowledge, yeah.
Okay. Now, to follow up with that, I would say, can you think of another person other than Jude, whether authentic or pseudepigraphal, anyone other than Jude that the Christians attributed to the letter to?
Not from the top of my head. No, sorry.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, I would just inform you that all the Christians, they've attributed it to a specific Jude, and it was Jude, the son of Joseph, brother of Jesus and James. Now, real quick, Nazam, how about we just quickly go over the possibility that it could have been a different Jude, someone other than the brother of Jesus? How about we just take a look and just see if we can, through the process of elimination, say he's unlikely, he's unlikely, he's unlikely. That way we can establish more of a common ground of why why I think it's the specific Jude who is the brother of Jesus and James and the son of Joseph.
Sounds like a good idea. Yeah.
Okay. So there is Jude's mentioned in the genealogies in Matthew and Luke. However, they come hundreds of years before Mary and Joseph even enter the scene. So wouldn't you agree that they would have been long dead, and therefore they're not even possible candidates? Okay. Now, Judas Iscariot, he committed suicide in the 3rd decade. And as you know, many scholars give the date range to this epistle, ranging from the 60s all the way to the 90s. So would you agree that he died way too early to even be a possible candidate, Judas Iscariot?
Yes, if you accept that Judas died. Because, to me, it's not clear exactly from history as to what exactly happened to Judas in the end.
Right. So what happened to him is he committed suicide, and when you put two and two together, you consider Matthew 27 and you consider Acts chapter 1. We are told he hung himself and that he fell, and therefore his insides busted. If you actually look, I can't think of the valley.
Well, one of them says he committed suicide. Another one said he tripped and fell, into the ditch that he bought.
Papias, you're referring to Papias, and Papias uses exaggerated language and Jewish idioms to describe
Acts. I was thinking of the book of Acts. So the book of Acts doesn't say he committed suicide.
Right. Well, that's an inference when he went to go and hang himself, right? And then when the book of Acts, says that's what happened. We do know that there is a valley there, and there's in that valley, I can't recall the name of it. There is a cliff,
and him going to hang himself in the book of Acts.
All right. Well, be that as it
In
may.
Matthew, he does that. Like in Matthew, he throws away,
Right.
the money that he got, and
Right.
out of guilt, he goes and commits suicide.
Right. Be that as it may, I actually don't want to get
So
sidetracked from
maybe
the
the
focus.
Epistle of Jude may have been written by Judas, because there's another
Do
gospel
you?
known as the Gospel of Judas, which
But
is obviously an apocryphal gospel.
right.
But in that gospel, Judas seems to be portrayed in a more positive light as a friend of Jesus, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. But just
So
for
maybe Judas did write the letter of Jude,
right. But
or
can
maybe
you
not.
tell me? Do you know the date that scholars attribute that the Gospel of Judas was written?
From I think it's the 2nd century, is it?
That's right. Yep. 2nd century. So it's extremely unlikely, and it's deemed
Sure, but it does
pseudepigraphal.
contain traditions about Judas, and I agree. Judas didn't write the Gospel of Judas, but it does contain traditions about Judas that do show him in a different light to the one that he is in the New Testament.
Of course, many pseudepigraphal works, as many, even though they contain heresy and unorthodox teaching, they do contain some truth and they do contain some accurate parts, But not to get off topic. So you would agree Judas Iscariot is unlikely to be the writer of the letter. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess it would be for the same reasons as to why I don't think the Judas, the brother of Jesus, wrote it as well.
Okay. So there is a Jude
Although
mention it.
we said it's possible, so
Right.
I
Well,
just thought it's not likely.
okay. So do you think that Judas Iscariot didn't die in at the time of the crucifixion?
I'm agnostic as to what happened to him.
Right.
Because
Well, according to the New
clear.
Testament,
But of course, he's now dead.
right. So just for clarification, because I want to be able to say you and I can agree that we can rule him out as an unlikely candidate as the author. So according to the New Testament,
Process, we can just eliminate him.
Okay, but here's the reason why we're not just dismissing him just for the sake of it, is because the New Testament writings tell us that he died, and even according to the Muslim view, the Islamic tradition tells us at least one of the candidates. I know there's others, but that Jesus was replaced with Judas, and then I know some friends tell us. So either way,
So we have 3 different stories as to what happened to Judas. So that's why I say I'm agnostic with regards to his demise.
Right. Well, the point is Nazam, whether you take your Islamic view of Judas being
I wouldn't say it's
replaced.
Islamic, but
Okay.
I would say
Okay.
it's a Muslim interpretation.
One Muslim interpretation out of several. Okay. Even if you take that one, or if you take the New Testament teaching, either one tells us that Jesus died around that Judas died around. I do believe Jesus died at the crucifixion too,
or 33,
but that Judas died at the time of the crucifixion. So would you agree that either way you look at it, we can eliminate him because it's very unlikely that dead men write letters?
Yeah.
Okay. Now there is a Jude mentioned in Acts 9 and Acts 15, but they're only mentioned once in that place. They're never mentioned again. We don't know anything about him. The Jude in Acts 15, all we know is he was also called Barsabas and was considered a prophet. None of the church fathers mention them or attribute them as being brothers of Jesus or James, and never as the author of a letter of a short epistle. So would you agree that it's unlikely that they would be the author of the letter, considering that?
Well, I mean, just because they're mentioned once doesn't mean that they weren't someone important or authoritative in the early church.
Right. So just because they're mentioned once, you're correct. Just because they're mentioned once doesn't mean that they're not a possibility. But that's why we're considering, if you weigh the evidence based on probability, they possibly could have been the author. But when you compare that, since we don't know anything about him, when you weigh that against the evidence of another Jude, who we have multiple lines of evidence telling us he was the son of Joseph, he was the brother of Jesus, he was the brother of James, and he actually authored the epistle, which one weighs more? Obviously, it would be the one with multiple lines of evidence, right? And so on the basis of probability, isn't it more probable, or I should say, isn't it less probable that he would be the author of the letter in comparison to another Jude who has way more evidence and attestation telling us that he
Mhm.
did author it? Wouldn't you agree with that?
Sure.
Okay. Okay. Now, we have two more candidates. And I think you're aware of these two last candidates right now that we can weigh. And I actually do agree one actually has is a good contender. But there is a Jude mentioned as the Bishop of Jerusalem. Are you aware of that?
No.
Okay. Well, there is a Jude mentioned in the list of bishops of Jerusalem. However, Epiphanius doesn't qualify which Jude this was. And commenting on that, W.G. Kumau says that equating the author of Jude with Bishop Jude, named in the Old Jerusalem list of bishops, runs aground the fact that we know nothing about him, whether he had a brother or not. And so Daniel Wallace agrees with this assessment, and he says that the evidence is too strong to consider this Jude. And then on top of that, in that same list, there actually a discrepancy. The Apostolic Constitutions actually says it qualifies which Jew that was. However, they say that he was the son of James, which would eliminate him if we accept it, because the author of the letter of Jude is the brother of James. So again, when we go back to probability, the evidence is against this Jude who's in the list of bishops of Jerusalem as being the author, because we don't know anything about him. And then what we do know about him tells us, okay, it can't be that Jude because he was the son of James. The author of Jude is the brother of James. And so that leaves us with one candidate who I do agree is the best candidate out of all of them. And I think you've heard this brought up with someone on one of your streams, but they think, and I agree, that the best candidate competing for the letter's authorship is one of the 12 apostles from Luke 6, the apostle Jude. You heard that argument?
No.
Okay. So they believe that, and I agree that the closest candidate we can get, it was either Judas, the brother of Jesus, or it was Judas the apostle who authored this letter. The problem, though, Nazam, and this is I'm going to echo the arguments of Michael Green and numerous other scholars. They tell us that it's very unlikely that Jude the apostle could be the author of the letter because he's called the son of James, whereas the author of the letter of Jude is the brother of James. And Michael Green argues additional point. He says that Judas the apostle could hardly be the one from Luke chapter 6:16, because that Jude is an apostle, but in verse 17, the author of Jude expressly dissociates himself from the apostles. And so, on this basis, I think that he's less likely to be the author in comparison to all the other evidence, which tells us the specific Jude, who's the son of Joseph, brother in Jesus and James, is the author. That Jude wrote the short epistle.
Well, this is the other thing as well. When the author of the letter of Jude, when he speaks about the apostle, he speaks about them as if they're like in the distant past. So he doesn't speak of like as if he's a contemporary to the apostles,
On
whereas Jude, the brother of James, would have been.
Okay, so on what basis do you conclude that Jude is speaking at a later time, and he's speaking about the apostles from the time in the past? On what basis do you draw that conclusion?
Yeah, it was argued from the Greek by one of the books I looked at the time. Um, so it would
I,
have
I am
either been.
aware. I am aware of this argument. I've looked at many sources, the commentaries, both for and against the authenticity of Jude. And there's two arguments that many put forth. One has to do with verse 3 in Jude, and one has to do with verse 17. And in those commentaries, those who did argue the same argument you're mentioning, that the apostles are mentioned all the way in the past, they do so based on the interpretation that Jude is writing at a later time, because the assumption is that he's referring to a time when all the apostles had already died. Is that is that along the same lines? Is that what you're referring to possibly?
It sounds like it.
Okay. So I would mention in response to that that whether you consider Jude 3 or Jude 17, it doesn't necessitate a late date interpretation. Many scholars like Gordon Fee, they tell us that, for example, verse 3 mentions, remember the faith. And therefore, the conclusion of some scholars is that, hey, he's referring to a body, an entire body of tradition, which means the the Pauline corpus was already done, which means the canon may have been established, or the majority of it. Therefore, all the apostles died, because he's referring to an entire body of tradition. But Paul uses the same language for passing down or delivering the gospel message to the Corinthians, which we see in 1 Corinthians 12, 1 Corinthians 11, verse 2. And Bauckham also says that the word pistes, right, refers to the content of what is believed, not necessarily an entire body of scripture, right? So this usage can already be found in Paul, and most clearly in Galatians 1:23. The same word is used in the same context of preaching the faith. So pistes is equivalent to the gospel. So when we read, let's just say, verse 3 in Jude, it doesn't necessitate that it's suggesting a body of tradition that was passed down from one generation, which presupposes all the apostles had died. So,
Yeah, well, as far as we know, the letters of Paul were not collected during his lifetime. But when Paul cites scripture, he's citing books that have been written before and prior to him, and that are like accepted as authoritative amongst Jews. When Paul cites these like pre-Pauline type creeds or hymns, there's a difference between like citing like a creed or a hymn or some form of prayer, then documents or corpus of scripture. Jude seems to regard scripture as being like the book of Enoch. Like he seems to treat that as scripture, as well as other, like the assumptions of Moses. He seems to regard that at the very least authoritative, if not even scripture. So to me, it does seem like my present view is that it was written by some anonymous, unknown Jude, who also happened to have a brother coincidentally named James.
Okay, so how do you treat the overwhelming evidence from antiquity, which identify a specific Jude, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus and James, as the author of this short epistle? What has more evidence
Well,
when you weigh it? That evidence that tells us, okay, it's this Jude, and they give the reasons why, and they name it, he's the son of Joseph. He's the brother of James and Jesus, compared to a theoretical position that maybe it was written by an anonymous Jew that we don't know about and we have no evidence about. When you weigh that on the scale of probability, which candidate is more likely to be the author? The one that you're, maybe presupposing right now, or the one that we can look at the evidence for?
well, I don't find the particular evidence that's brought forward to be convincing. I find the evidence to be a bit late compared to when the document was said to be first written. The last thing is, I find it odd that he should mention that he's the brother of James, but not mention that he's the brother of Jesus.
Yeah, and I think, guys, this is a good point for me to like jump in. Nazam, if you want to redirect any questions, I don't know if you can or not, or if you want to, because I know you didn't really put too much together for it. But if you want to take it in any direction, I'll let you jump in to do that. But I just also want to let people know that if you want to ask questions to either one about anything that you've heard so far or something else, I mean, you're more than welcome to. But go ahead and pick it up, guys. I mean, you guys have been doing great. I mean, we're getting close to an hour, so
Sure, I
about
wasn't
another 10
expecting
minutes.
that we were able to. Yeah.
And you guys did great. You're really cordial. Both of you have been really cordial to each other, and
So,
I haven't had
like
to
I
jump
said,
in much.
I don't have a problem discussing with say Luke.
Okay.
Likewise,
Um,
Nazam. Likewise, Nazam.
All right. Well, I'll let you guys continue. I just wanted to give at least everybody an opportunity to throw a question or two out there before we wrap it up. We got about another 7 minutes or so.
say Luke, I don't like just because the letter of Jude, in my view, is by some unknown or Jude. I don't like throw it out because I still feel that it does have some value because it tells us something about the history of the early church. Like from Jude, we note that there are like other Christians that he condemns as being like false Christians. And also, it seems like at the time there was like great apostasy where, um, people were expecting, or many people were expecting Jesus to return within their own lifetime. And when that did not happen, many people seem to have left the faith, or people were using that as an argument to say, Christianity isn't true. So it seems that Jude was written within this subtext as a response, and especially his opponent seems to be like other Christians that he's condemning.
Jude.
Yeah, yeah. So
Well,
the reason why it's not so much a question, I just want to just make it clear that just because it's by some unknown author, it doesn't mean it doesn't have any historical value.
I agree. Some anonymous writings are good. I mean, historians actually look at these because we don't dismiss everything as unvaluable. Historians actually treat apocryphal books and other books for
Mm.
evidence. It's from looking at these that we can gain a knowledge about certain individuals, certain practices that take place. So I'm in agreement with you 100%. Now, regarding certain persons, right? That's mentioned, right, in verse 4. You said, it's written maybe to Christians or maybe not, right? Well, we're uncertain. Jude does not indicate, who this group of individuals were. But I will remind you that Bauckham gives examples and he points out that Jude is using the word tines for the word certain persons. Jude is using that, and this word usually is found in other places in the New Testament, such as Romans 3:8 and 2 Corinthians 3:1, and it usually designates a group of people that are known to the letter's audience, even though they might not be known to us. And so Bauckham
Hmm.
tells us that that word "tenus" in the New Testament in all these places designates a definite group of people, well known to the readers. It's a common, and it's often used of opponents with the hint of disparagement. And so what
Interesting.
we could ascertain, at least from this and looking from the body of the New Testament, is that the author, the certain persons may not have been known to us, but they were certainly known to Jude's original audience. And we could also ascertain that we do know they were ungodly and denied Jesus as their master, according to everything else we read. Now, you mentioned that you would still choose uh Jude being pseudepigraphal. I think you said over Jude being identified, or the authorship of Jude being attributed to the brother of Jesus and James. I would just say that on a scale of probability, which is what historians and scholars use, the evidence favors Jude, the son of Joseph, brother in Jesus, in comparison to an anonymous author that no one knows about. And I do agree, though, even though you have some later writings, we still could ascertain valuable knowledge of the past from looking at this evidence. Oh, and that reminded me another point you said. Jude is late, and one of your friends on your team also brought forth this argument that, hey, you know what, the evidence we do have for Jude is late. It's coming from the second century onwards, right? But
My view is it's probably written like maybe in the 70s,
in the 70s.
in the first century,
Okay, yeah.
after the destruction of the temple.
Right. So yeah, so the majority of scholars, almost all of them, but there are some that push it really late, but they do so based on an interpretation, not the external evidence. But the majority of scholars do give the date range for this letter from 60 to 90. So yeah, I agree with you. You're correct. But as far as external evidence attesting to the authorship of this letter, if I recall correctly, it was argued in one of the streams is that, hey, maybe that Christian writer of antiquity does attribute it to the son of Joseph, brother of Jesus and James, but he's writing in the 2nd century. That one's writing in the 3rd or 4th century. In response to that, I'll just quote one of many historians who say that's not problematic at all. And let me quote for you A.N. Sherwin White, Oxford historian A.N. Sherwin White. She says on page 186 of Roman Society and Roman Law, she writes, quote, "We are generally dealing with derivative sources of marked biases and prejudices composed at least 1 or 2 generations after the events they describe, but much more often, as with the lives of Plutarch or the central decades of Levi, from 2 to 5 centuries later," unquote. And so she's not the only one. I can name Paul Meyer, Geza Vermes, many other historians, and even Bart Ehrman, who Mohammed Hijab recently interviewed. They're all in agreement that we would like sources early, but the fact is that the majority of our sources that are reliable come, 2, 3, 4, 5 centuries after the events or the persons that they are describing. So I just want to point out that when you look at the standards of historians, um, they don't dismiss any attestation or any evidence on the basis that it's written much later than what's being described. And so I'm not sure if you were aware of that, but that's the standards of a historian.
Yeah, we have to go on a case-by-case basis.
Right. Right. So generally speaking, late is not
full stories.
Right. So just generally speaking, Nazam,
yeah.
I'm sorry I just cut you off. I'm sorry, but just generally speaking, late does not mandate unreliability. So it's a non sequitur to assume if something's late, it must be reliable. I would just point that out. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sure, it's not necessarily so. Although when it comes to historiography, in Western studies, scholars like the sources to be as early as they can be, and also they want them to be like disinterested as well as being independent as well. But we can just make the best of what we can.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, I agree that not necessarily just because something's late doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't contain any true information in it.
Awesome. I'm in agreement.
And as I said, just because the letter of Jude, in my view, is by an unknown author, it doesn't mean it doesn't have any historical value to it.
Right. So
yeah, and that's a good place to just to wrap it up. And I think you guys have fleshed out a lot of it.
Nazam, one more question, please.
Yeah,
David?
sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So now I understand your position regarding the letter. I'll just ask you one question, Nazam. I know that's your position. Do you grant the possibility that the author could be Jude, the son of James, brother of Jesus and James? Do you grant that as a possibility for the authorship of this letter?
Yeah, I mean, anything's possible as long as it's logically possible.
But personally,
I don't feel it's likely.
Okay, so
in my view, but that doesn't mean that it's set on stone. I can always change my mind.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, guys. Well, this has been really great. I'm going to go around again just so you guys can plug in whatever you're working on, whatever website you want our guests to visit. And, I encourage everybody to go back to the EF Dawah's YouTube channel and actually listen to their series and hear the challenges that they present and, reach out. And if you guys want to have a conversation,
I think Luke,
do it.
You've been on one of them as well, or you've been in 2 or 3 episodes.
Yeah, I've tuned in to a couple of them.
Do you remember which ones you were on? Maybe if viewers are interested, they could.
I came in Jude. I came in the first stream of Jude before I was rudely cut off, but I didn't get to all these points. So I really appreciate getting you coming on and getting to discuss these points in more depth without any interruption, Nazam. I really appreciate that.
Cool.
David, do we get a minute to wrap up?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to give both of you guys the opportunity to wrap up real quick. And like I said, plug your shows, plug whatever you're working on, man. This is that time.
All right. All right. So I want to thank you, David, for hosting this a discussion with me and Nazam. I really appreciate it. Nazam, likewise, I apologize for any miscommunication that there may have been. I really thank you for discussing these points, and I'm glad that we got to cover these more in depth. I give all glory to the triune God. Real quick, just to address Mustafa C, because I saw that he made a comment regarding Jude being disputed. That's a non sequitur to assume that just because something is disputed, it must therefore be rejected or it must be something bad. But if we want to draw that conclusion, it can, I can turn it around and overthrow Muhammad's prophethood, because some people had doubts that he was a prophet. And so I would just remind my friend Mustafa C that a book that's disputed is not necessarily a bad thing. I would argue, on the contrary, it's a good thing. It shows that the early Christians had discernment and they didn't just accept any book because someone said it was from God. So I say, amen. I'm glad that we got to talk about Jude. For the most part, me and Nazam got to eliminate all the other Judes. I understand his position is Jude anonymous writing. I don't think it's strong evidence. Nevertheless, I do feel that we were able to eliminate all the other Judes, and all the early evidence from antiquity tells us that the author of this letter was a specific Jude, the son of Joseph and brother of James and Jesus. And so I look at all the evidence, and I maintain that we can be sure on the historicity of this letter. We can have confidence in it, and I give all glory to God. Thank you.
Hey, and that's questions for you too, real quick, so you can answer it from Anthony Wagoneer.
Sure.
Go ahead, answer it. It says, "Are you on Clubhouse?"
No, I'm not in Clubhouse. I've been told. I think even Nazam told me, I should create a Clubhouse or some other
Right
social media contacts. Yeah, even you, David. I think even you mentioned that to me too.
right on. Well, all right, Nazam, I'll let you
Well, you can
finish out.
find me on Clubhouse as well. If you search for me, possibly either Nazam44 or just Nazam Guffoor. Otherwise, I have a YouTube channel myself. It's called Nazam44. The majority of content is like Muslim Christian dialogues and debates. And most of the videos are Dr. Shabir Ali's debates and videos. Some of them I have also of some Speakers Corner videos and of Mufti Abu Layth and Sheikh Atabek and Yusuf Ishmael from South Africa and Dr. Jamal Badawi. So I have quite a few content, and I originally started the channel all the way back in 2006, I believe, when YouTube came out a year before. So yeah, I guess my channel is one of the kind of like oldest kind of so-called Muslim apologetic channels. But yeah, I also just want to thank David for the invitation and for Say Luke for inviting me. I apologize for coming late. I had some technical problems, and also we could have discussed the kind of behind the scenes kind of matters beforehand. So I apologize for bringing that up, because I just wanted to clarify, because I was just kind of off guard, although I didn't mind discussing the topic, and I felt in the end it proved beneficial, and I hope I haven't deterred you from, like, in the future of contacting me and having like either a private or public discussion. Or
Thank you, Nazam.
and
Yeah, I was just about to invite you on again in the future for a discussion between. I was thinking about putting one together with. I have a friend that's into Judaism, and I was going to have a Muslim and a Christian on to discuss some stuff in the future. So I was just going to say, hey,
good.
But yeah, I also think it's funny because I remember when YouTube started too. So I'm old too, man. So don't. I hear you. I feel your pain. Oh yeah, we're old guys.
And back then there wasn't so many adverts as well.
Yeah. I also wanted to probe you real quick on Speaker's Corner. It's pretty crazy over there, doesn't it?
It's quite a unique place. There are other Speakers Corners in the world, and even in the UK there's more than one. But the one in Hyde Park, London, I'm quite fortunate, to be able to attend like every week because I live close by. But yeah, it can be quite intense.
Yeah, I've heard, man. I listened to Unbelievable radio
Nice.
show by
Justin
Justin
Briley, yeah.
Briley. Yeah, and
I've been on there.
yeah, they talk about it over there, and you know, had some shows on. I was like, man, it's
Documentary as
intense.
well. Yeah.
Right on, guys. Well, you know, I really appreciate both of you guys coming on today and talking about this subject. It's pretty interesting. It's fascinating. I've always been fascinated by the idea of you know, the gospels being unanimous or whatever, and you know, I once heard EP Sanders say that, you know, it actually added to the authenticity of the gospel. It
Right.
elevated it, and I thought that was pretty interesting. But yeah, very interesting, guys. Again, I thank you all so much for coming on. You know, stay tuned for more content. We've got a lot more coming your way. I even think Luke had somebody else that wanted to talk to him about Peter, right?
That's right. Yeah. Someone else wanted to
So,
talk to me about it, Peter. So stay tuned.
yeah,
We'll see.
yeah. And you know, like I said, PRA is a place where guests can come on. You know, you know, fans can come on. If you have something you want to discuss and you need a platform, you're more than welcome to reach out and you know, do that. You know, otherwise we're just going to keep pumping out as much content as we can, and you know, we try to be the beacon of fairness here. You know, let you
Awesome.
guys discuss and let our guests discuss, and that's what we did here today. So I thank you guys. Looking forward to the future. Again, thanks for tuning in, everybody. This is Russell, and I am out of here.